Down below, we're going to institute a number of different policies. In this little matrix here, I've got 6 different policy possibilities. And we're going to analyze them kind of one at a time. Number 1 is a tax. Suppose there's a tax of $2. I want to know what the change in consumer surplus is, the change in producer surplus, the change in government revenue, and therefore the total change in society. So the change. If we go back up to our graph, what is the change in consumer surplus? This is tough. We haven't covered this, just FYI, but somebody might be able to pick it out, especially for an extra credit point. Let's see, where's my book here? The change in consumer surplus. So, first step would be saying, what is the new situation, the new consumer surplus? What's that? Is there any consumer surplus? So how did the tax affect the free market? Did quantity go up or down from 100? Down, right? QT was located to the left of the quantity. So quantity went down. And what did it go up by? All right. So what I want to show you next here, I kind of did with the last thing. There's 2 techniques to showing the tax. One we did the very first time, where I did a shift of the supply curve, and I drew the fake supply curve and the real supply curve. And in this case, if there's a tax of $2, what does the fake supply curve look like? How much do I shift it up by? $2. So the business just says, hey, what the heck, I'm going to charge $2. But then they quickly find out that consumers aren't willing to pay $2 more for every unit. And so they cut back on their purchases, and we end up going here, right? And then QT is here. Now, the other way to do it is to not draw the fake supply curve at all, and to just draw the wedge, the tax wedge. And so the tax wedge is that, remember that wedge that it ended up being, which was the government revenue? Just kind of visualize the tax wedge coming in, and it gets, the height of it's $2, and it gets stuck here between that point and that point. So the amount of the tax is this vertical height here is the tax wedge. That's the tax equal to $2. The top part of the tax wedge touches the demand curve, and so what does 5 represent? $5 is what? After we implement the tax, the price the consumer pays. That's our PC. And what's $3? The price that the producer gets, right? So that's our $3. So the consumer pays 5, but the business really only gets 3 because there's $2 going to the government, and so PC is $5. PP is $3. So the consumer is going to go out and spend $5 now to buy less product, because the quantity QT, the quantity after the tax, has fallen to, let's just say, 80 units, even though that's not very proportional, but I suppose I could have done 50, but whatever QT ends up being. Back to my question. What is the new consumer surplus? What area? A. I heard a few people say A, right? Consumers are buying 80 units. Some people were willing to pay more than $5, right? We already established that. Some people were willing to pay $5, $6, whatever. So there's still some consumer surplus. So consumer surplus is the difference between what we're willing to pay and what we actually pay for each unit we consume. And so we start from left to right. Consumers are willing to pay this amount. They actually pay $5. Actual, $5. Willing, actual, willing, actual, willing, actual, willing, actual, all the way out to 80 units, which means the new area is area A. Which finally brings us to our possibility of filling in this first blank. What is the change in consumer surplus? What is the change in consumer surplus?
A plus B plus C minus B.
I heard some A's and some B's and C's. The change in consumer surplus. Did it go up or down? Down. So how would we express the change then? What did we lose? B and C. So we're going to put the change here as a negative sign. We lost B and C. So minus B, minus B, minus C. Change is 100.
So we started out at
Well, we're just gonna stick to areas for right now. Okay? So yes, you might be able with enough numbers to be able to calculate the areas, but we're just gonna stay with the letters, and we'll see why. And we might need to go to numbers later. All right, producers. What is the new producer surplus? What is the new producer surplus? J, right? They're only selling 80. They're getting $3. They got J. So what's the change in producer surplus? Minus F minus G. Minus F minus G. Now notice here that we've got our three agents in the economy. Households being represented as consumers, buyers of the product, producers, the businesses, and now we've got government too. What's happened to government revenue? Has it gone up or down with the tax? Up. What amount?
$2 per unit.
I heard some C's, I heard some B. Talk to me in areas now. B and F, right? So the tax revenue, like we did last time, was B and F. Again, we could do $2 times 80 would be $160, but it's areas B and F if we stick to areas. All right, so area B plus F. Now, the reason we have it drawn up this way is to analyze the overall effects to the economy of imposing a tax. I've taken into account all of the agents in the economy. This is what happens to consumers, this is what happens to producers, this is what happens to government. What is the net effect for society, the total change, if those are the members of society? Minus C minus G. So this is where it's kind of fun. We get to cancel out. Oh, I get it. Consumers get socked with the B, but the government gets it, so they kind of wash with each other. And then plus F and minus F, those producers get socked with something, but they lose that. So the overall effect to society is minus C minus G. Do taxes sound like a good idea for society? Not on the face of it, not on what we're doing here. If we're taxing a good that is, let's say, milk or something that's harmless. I'm trying to think of a harmless good that's not booze and pot and all this fun stuff we've been talking about. But something boring like milk. If we tax milk, is that a good idea for society? This says that society experiences an overall loss if we add in together all of the surpluses. Again, conceptually with a free market, consumers were enjoying C and G. And that got stripped away from us because of the tax, causing a reduction in the consumption of milk, or whatever this good is. In other words, taxing one group to shuffle it to another isn't quite dollar for dollar if there's a quantity effect. And that's the big lesson here, is the quantity effect, the reduction in exchange going on. Somebody's not getting milk that otherwise was getting it. The 95th person here might have been a mom that had some kids. Maybe it's somebody like that, right? And the milk prices would have actually been a little less had that mother been able to buy milk for their infant. Okay? So that's the effect we're tracking. All right, well, that's cool. Let's go to a subsidy. What if we put on a $2 subsidy?
That affects F, G, and H.
F, G, and H. Okay? Let's do a little more systematically at it. So let's do it one step at a time. Fill in the box. Change in consumer surplus.
G minus H.
What happens to prices with the subsidy of $2? Notice I strategically chose $2. What happens to the price that the consumer pays? Does it go up or down? Down. To what? Using these numbers. Down to 2. So from 4 down to 2. 5 to 3. All right, so we got to work on the effects of the subsidy. So using my tax wedge method, the edge of the wedge, I'm going to try to make my fingertips here. I wish I had a little bit better drawing. Oh, let me get the shadow out of the way. So here's the edge of the wedge. I'm going to shove my tax wedge or subsidy wedge in here and come floating in and stay below the supply curve and above the demand curve until it gets wedged in there. And the top part of the wedge touches the supply curve and the bottom part touches the demand curve. And if you go back and review your page where we went over this in class, that's exactly what we did. The subsidy created a wedge between what the price the producer receives. I used Ottawa University and students on that example. The difference between what the student pays and what they receive. Let's see, I wish I had my other marker here for nice colors. I guess I'm going to use black. I got blue, but you guys probably can't even tell. So with the subsidy example, we've got the price the producer receives now being the $5. And the price that the consumer pays being the $3. And the edge of the wedge is the $2. So with the subsidy, I'll circle it. Maybe we can kind of have that notation going. What is the change in consumer surplus? By the way, we started from a free market, not from the tax situation. So free market was ABC for the consumer. Now we're going to impose a subsidy of $2. What is the change in consumer surplus? ABC plus FG. So you want to add FG? No.
Plus B plus F.
Plus D, did I hear, as a dog?
B as in boy. Plus
B as in boy.
Plus F as in.
Plus F as in Frank?
Yeah.
No. So we have ABC for starters, and now we have a subsidy. What are we adding?
D.
D? This one?
Yeah.
So what's consumer surplus? What's the definition? Flip, 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 flip. Give me a definition. Flip, 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 flip. Dollar value measure of? Okay, and then what was the next part? The difference? Good. Burn that definition in your head. It's the same thing that I'm going through here. So what does the consumer actually pay with the subsidy? $3. How much do they consume? 80? 100? How much do they consume? More. How much more? This much more. I didn't write that down yet, but the quantity after the subsidy, remember the reason why we're subsidizing education is because we think we want more people educated in society rather than less, and so it encourages people to go get educated. So the quantity after the subsidy is out here. So consumers are buying that much education, if you will, and they're paying $3. They're buying this much, paying $3. We start from left to right, and we look at that definition. The difference between what we're willing to pay and what we actually pay. $3. Willing, actual, willing, actual, willing, actual, willing, actual. Am I done yet? No. Willing, actual, willing, actual. There's your new consumer surplus. Plus F, plus G, plus H, plus I. You got it, right? So we had ABC, but now I picked up F, G, H, and I. So down in our little matrix here, we're going to put plus F, plus G, plus H, plus I. How about them producers? What's going on with them? So FGJ was free market. What are those producers changing by? Talk to me in areas. H, I, B, C, D. Ooh, that sounded kind of good. What is the producer surplus again? The difference between what and what? Difference between what they actually get and the minimum amount they must get. The minimum is given to us by the supply curve. They're actually selling QS, right? And so actual minimum, actual minimum, actual minimum, actual minimum, actual minimum. We added B, C, D. So the producers picked up plus B, plus C, plus D. How about that old government? Government revenue. What's going on in terms of government revenue? Minus B minus F. No. Plus G plus D. No. So give me all, go ahead and start listing. B, C, F, G. H, I, E, and D. That's right. That's the whole doggone thing. If you look back at your notes, we just want to think conceptually now, how much is the government spending on this program? Well, they're spending $2 for every unit. How many units are going out? QS. Let me put a number on QS here. Let's say it's 120. So if the quantity being sold is 120, the government is shelling out $240 on this program. That's represented by areas B, C, D, E, F, G, and H. When we enter them in the matrix, how do we enter them? As a positive or a negative? Negative. They are spending money. Minus B, minus C, minus D, minus E, minus F, minus G, minus H, minus I. Woo! Now the fun part. Let's see how society shook out here with this one. All these things look good here. So we got, let's see, there's a minus F and a plus F. There's a plus G and a minus G. There's a plus H and a minus H. There's a plus I and a minus I. There's a B and a B and a C and a C and a D and a D. Oh, whoa, hey, what's going on here? You mean the government can't buy their way into prosperity for the society? Geez, I thought that's what Obama was spending all that money on. You mean that could possibly be bad for society to shift resources into different goods, to kind of just pick out something that they think is a winner and say, hey, let's throw some money at that. Maybe we can get more of that stuff. Those sorts of shuffles might also lead to a loss for society overall, an overall loss, as we take into account the welfare benefits of each of these constituencies. We have a special name for this that was from chapter 4, actually, and it's called deadweight loss. Deadweight loss. A policy change that ends up creating a negative number here is a deadweight loss to society. In other words, we didn't shuffle things to add value to society, we actually shrunk it. We shrunk the pie and created what we call a deadweight loss. A deadweight loss of, we call that DWL. A deadweight loss is an overall loss to society from a policy change taking into account households, businesses, and government. A deadweight loss. Okay, so scratch that out of your head. We're starting over again with column 3. What happens if we take these numbers and we now do a price ceiling? A price ceiling of $2 or $3. A price ceiling of $3. All right. Now, when we did a price ceiling, who was the intent to help? Who are we intending to help with the price ceiling? The consumers, right? So prices were too high. We're saying, oh, we're not going to let prices be too high. So we're going to set the price ceiling at $3. So I saw some of you doing an air club here. If we go, whoops, and we put a ceiling. I got this big fat marker, sorry. Put a ceiling price of $3. We get something like that. So what is the change in consumer surplus? What is the change in consumer surplus? The change relative to the free market again. So we have ABC. What is the new consumer surplus, or the change in consumer surplus? What do we change it by? F, G, H, and I? That's wrong. ABF. Okay, what's ABF? Is that the change, or what is it? You're on to something, by the way. That's the new one. Good. Now, why are you stopping with just ABF? What's the key thing we got to know with the ceiling?
With the ceiling, it brings the quantity down.
All right, it brings the quantity down. Good, right? So a price ceiling created what that begins with an S? A shortage. Because yes, producers are going to supply 120. I'm sorry, consumers want to buy 120, but are there 120 available? No, there's only 80. The short side of the market kind of wins, is one little saying. The short side of the market wins. Consumers can't buy what's not available, right? So there's a shortage. They only consume 80. You correctly pointed out it's ABF, but I have not heard what the change in consumer surplus is. Plus F minus C. Good. Put that in there. So plus F. We're going to add F, but we're going to lose C. So we kind of got an indeterminate effect going on with consumers. By the way, this is picking up the logic of it, right? If there's a shortage, some consumers that used to buy it aren't able to buy it anymore because it's not around. It's too cheap. Some consumers got lucky and they paid cheap prices if they were able to buy it, but some of them are missing out. And so we need to kind of analyze those two effects to see the whole effect on the consumer. How about them producers? Change in producer surplus. F and G, positive or minus? Minus, right? We had FGJ. Now they're only selling 80. The difference between what they actually get and the minimum amount, actual minimum, all that business, out to 80. They're left with area J, which means they lost areas F and G, minus F minus G. How about that government? Price ceiling, change in government revenue. None. Good answer. Price ceiling collects no revenue and spends no money. It's just that's the law. Prices can't go above $3. So there's no change in revenue, so you can just put a big fat 0 there. And the fun part, we add them all up. Consumers gained F, but it was at the expense of producers, so that was just kind of a transfer. And then, whoopsie, no more transfers. Minus C minus G. Another deadweight loss. So the logic that some people have of, those prices are too high, those landlords are gouging those poor college students, let's create a price ceiling. This is what they're trying to do, is the transfer of the F, right? Oftentimes the intent is to say, let me take $1 from those big bad landlords and give it to the poor college student who's renting that apartment. Let's take $1 from them, give $1 to them. That's the perception. Without knowing the economics behind it, we miss out on the quantity effect, and that the society experiences an overall loss because there's less apartments out there. There's less exchanges being taken on because of that policy. And so there's another deadweight loss with the price ceiling. All right. New one for you. Price floor, $5. So kind of erase all the other stuff. We're back to a free market. And now let's impose a price floor. What this is kind of to counter this one, without government expenditure. In other words, this price floor is just like what we did before. The regular old price floor, $5. What's going to happen here? What happens to the consumers? Minus B minus C. Okay, so the price jumps up to the price floor of $5. So let me try my green marker here to draw my big fat floor. So there's my floor. All right? And so consumers used to have ABC, but now they have just A. Okay? How about the producers? Let me just, as long as I'm looking at this, what do they got? B, C, and D. Plus B plus C plus D. No. They gain B, and what they do? Lose G. Why? The quantity effect again. That always gets us, right? It's like we want to have this. Now, you were correct that the quantity being supplied by the farmers was 120 bushels, but they weren't able to sell them all because at that high price of 5, consumers are only buying 80 of them. So again, the short side of the market wins. They can build them, but that doesn't mean these guys are going to buy them. And so if the law says the price can't be less than 5, then we're going to have 80. The short side of the market wins, and we have our producers gaining B but losing G. All right, so let's summarize what went on here. We've got a loss of B and C, minus B minus C for those consumers. The producers gained B but lost G. So we successfully saved the family farm by adding B, but that was at the expense of consumers. How much government revenue is collected? How much? Zippo. Nothing with the price floor, minus C minus G. Another deadweight loss. Now, these deadweight losses say something here. If we got rid of the tax, if we got rid of the subsidy, if we got rid of the ceiling, or if we got rid of the floor, what would happen to society's welfare? It would be better. It would go up. In other words, we just undo what we did, and we would gain C and G, C and G, E, C and G. We would gain that stuff. It's kind of the flip side. In other words, by deregulating or getting the government out of the way, then this is showing that there would be increases in welfare overall. Okay. Now, this particular situation is interesting. They bring a little real life into this. Back in the early 1970s, the government wanted to help farmers. And so they did this. They said, you know what? The price of corn is too low at $4. So let's go ahead and help the family farm and put in a price floor of $5. Farmers, of course, went in and planted their fields. They produced a bunch of corn. Nobody bought it. The corn just was there. And the intent of the policy, of course, was to help out the farmer. So what did the government do to correct that problem? If they were trying to help the farmer, they're like, whoopsie, I didn't think about the surplus issue here. They bought the extra corn. Good. So they end up buying the extra corn. Now, what did they do with it? Let's do this one first here. So let's go back to our problem here. And now we're going to look at a price floor with government expenditure, government buying that surplus, okay? So here we go. Change in consumer surplus. If we buy the farmer's excess corn, does that help out the current consumers any? No. So it's still minus B minus C. Producers. What is the change in producer surplus, again, relative to a free market? The twist we're making is that we're going to say the government's going to buy any excess that you have. So what do they gain now? B, C, and D, right? So now we're getting the effect that you were looking for. The farmer doesn't care if they sell it to the government or sell it to the consumer, as long as they get it sold. And that gives them plus B, plus C, plus D. Change in government revenue. What's going on here? So I heard some minuses. That sounds like the right direction. So we got minus, what did I hear, D? Is that it? More. C, good. Is that it? More. B. B? No, G. I like that. So we got D, C, G. Good. Are we done? No, we need H. Are we done? I. E. Whew. Are we done? L and M. Now, step back from the numbers. I know some of you are like, oh, what letter? I don't know what planet I'm on. Kind of come back to how much corn, using my numbers here, how much corn is the government buying? All the extra, which we know is 120 minus 80 is 40. And how much are they paying for every bushel or every unit? $5, the full amount, right? So they're spending this rectangle. Our rectangle kind of flipped on us. They're buying this whole rectangle. You are correct. They are all minuses, so let's get to it. Got a lot of work ahead of us here. We got minus C, minus D, minus E, minus G, minus H, minus I, minus L, minus we add them up. Let's see, we got the B canceling, the C minus C plus C, we got the D. Oh boy. Now we add up all of the players, all of the agents, and I get minus C, minus E, minus G, minus H, minus I, minus L, minus M. Yeah! How did that policy sound like? How did that one work out for the government? Not so hot. Back to the real life story. You are correct. They bought the surplus. They bought the surplus. And then what did they do with it? They had all this corn sitting around. The government owned it. Yeah, they didn't have e-fuel back in the 70s. That might have been an idea. Could they sell it? No. Could they give it away to poor people? Not really, because you're disrupting the market. Those poor people might be buying corn too. That would be selling it at a price of zero. So if they're going to follow their own laws, they couldn't do anything except maybe try to sell it at $5. If the government just follows their own laws, which, by the way, they don't always do very well in every circumstance, but let's just say they did. So they put it in bins, and they said, we'll worry about it next year. Guess what happened when next year came around and they had the whole bins, silos full of corn? Oh, we'll worry about it next year. Guess what happened that following year after they, we'll worry about it next year. And so the corn sat and rotted and wasted away. A true deadweight loss for society. That's probably the best example of a government policy that really led to complete waste. And they ended up burning it and trashing it, the stuff that wasn't there, and it was all gone. And so economists, you didn't have to be an economist to figure out that that could have been likely the most stupid idea in the history of the earth of how that transpired to help out the farmer. Now, one thing that you can start to see between these two, from society's perspective, which policy is worse? This one or this one? This one. Why? How do you know that for sure? There's one way. It's kind of simple. I don't mean to complicate it, but you know for sure that this one is worse than this one. Why? Because the same letters are there, right? There's the minus C, there's the minus C, there's the minus G, there's the minus G, and then this has got a whole bunch of other bad stuff to it. So this is more wasteful for society compared to this one. And that's how we start to use this welfare analysis to determine what is better and what's not. So this last one is the target price program. And economists kind of went back to the drawing board and said, well, how could we improve things? And they did. I'm going to hold you in suspense until Friday for the conclusion of The Economist to the Rescue, Econ Heroes. Yeah.